Hello, everyone, and welcome back to English in Fluency. I'm Alex, your host for today. I am so glad you've chosen to spend this time with me today. Let me start by asking you a question. Have you ever had a moment where you felt like you were actually going backwards? A moment where all the progress you thought you'd made, all the hours of hard work you'd put in, suddenly seemed to vanish into thin air? Maybe it happened like this. One day, you have a fantastic conversation in English. The words flow easily. You feel confident. You feel like you've finally arrived. But the very next day, you're watching a movie or listening to a podcast, and you feel completely lost, struggling to catch the meaning as the words fly past you. In that moment, a sinking feeling washes over you. A voice in your head whispers, "I thought I was getting better, but maybe I'm just fooling myself. Maybe I haven't learned anything at all." If that feeling is familiar, if you have ever felt that frustrating, confusing paradox where the more you learn, the less you feel you know, then I need you to listen very closely. What if I told you that this feeling, this uncomfortable sense of your own smallness in the face of a vast subject, is not a sign that you are failing? What if it is actually one of the clearest, most reliable signs that you are on exactly the right path? Today, we are going to dive deep into one of the most profound secrets of real, meaningful learning. It's the journey from the shaky confidence of a beginner through the overwhelming valley of realizing just how much there is to learn, and finally, toward a quiet, humble, and resilient wisdom. It's the truth that the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And learning to embrace that truth is the key to unlocking your true potential. I remember this lesson hitting me with the force of a tidal wave when I first truly fell in love with the night sky. I bought a small telescope, and my initial goal was simple: learn the planets, recognize a few constellations. For a few weeks, it was pure joy. I felt powerful every time I could point to a speck of light and say with certainty, "That's Saturn." I felt like I was mastering my little corner of the universe, but the more I read, the more I looked, the more the universe began to reveal its true, terrifying, beautiful scale. I learned that our entire galaxy is just one of billions, that the light from the stars I was seeing had traveled for thousands of years to reach my eye. One night, standing alone in the quiet darkness, looking up at that endless sea of light, I wasn't filled with the pride of knowledge. I was filled with a sense of profound humility. I felt infinitesimally small. And in that feeling of smallness, a new, deeper kind of learning began. That is the journey we are going on together today. We will explore why our brains trick us into feeling overconfident at the beginning. We will sit with that uncomfortable feeling of being humbled and overwhelmed. We will confront the inner monster of perfectionism, that voice that tells you, "Don't even try until you know everything." And most importantly, we will discover a new mindset, a new way of seeing your own progress that will give you the strength to keep going, especially when the path feels uncertain. So, if you have ever felt paralyzed by the fear of making a mistake, if you have ever delayed your dreams because you told yourself you weren't ready yet, then this conversation is for you. This is your permission slip to be a beginner. This is your guide to finding joy in the journey, not just the destination. So please, find a comfortable spot, take a slow, deep breath, and join me. let's explore why feeling like you know nothing might just be the beginning of knowing everything that truly matters. Let's begin our journey with something we have all experienced at one time or another. That distinct feeling of being absolutely 100% sure about something, only to discover later that we were completely and utterly mistaken. Perhaps it was something small and insignificant, like confidently singing the wrong lyrics to your favorite song for years, only to have a friend gently correct you, causing that brief moment of surprised embarrassment. Or maybe it was a bigger belief, like thinking you had a complete understanding of how a complex system at your workplace functioned. But when you were asked to explain it in detail, you suddenly realized you had only ever seen the very surface of it. This kind of experience happens far more often than we might like to admit. And interestingly, there is a fascinating psychological pattern that helps explain why. The less we know about a particular subject, the more confident we often feel in our limited knowledge. It sounds completely backward, doesn't it? Logically, you would assume that the more knowledge you accumulate, the more confident you would become. But that's not always how the human mind works, especially in the early stages of learning. There's a well-known concept in psychology that shines a bright light on this very phenomenon. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Now, don't let the complicated-sounding name intimidate you. The core idea is actually quite simple and incredibly relatable. It describes a cognitive bias where people with low ability or limited knowledge in a specific area tend to significantly overestimate their own competence. In other words, when someone doesn't know much, they often don't even know what they don't know, which leads them to believe they know a lot. However, as these individuals begin to learn more, as they start to uncover the true complexity and nuance of the subject, their confidence often takes a surprising nosedive. It doesn't drop because they are getting worse or less intelligent. Quite the opposite. Their confidence falls because they are finally beginning to develop the awareness to recognize the vast expanse of what there is still left to learn. Let's trace this journey with a more detailed example. Imagine a young man named Leo who decides he wants to learn how to cook. He's never really cooked before, but he watches a few popular cooking shows on TV and thinks, "That doesn't look so hard." For his first attempt, he decides to make spaghetti with a simple tomato sauce from a jar. He boils the pasta, heats the sauce, combines them in a bowl, and adds a sprinkle of cheese. It tastes pretty good. He feels a huge sense of accomplishment. He proudly takes a photo and posts it online with the caption, "My new life as a chef begins." He feels incredibly confident. In his mind, he has successfully cooked a meal. He thinks, "Cooking is actually quite easy. I'm a natural at this." At this stage, Leo is standing on top of what the Dunning-Kruger effect amusingly calls Mount Stupid. His confidence is high, but his actual knowledge is very low. Then, something begins to change. Encouraged by his initial success, Leo decides to try a more ambitious recipe, one that requires him to make the tomato sauce from scratch. He buys fresh tomatoes, onions, garlic, and herbs. As he starts following the recipe, he immediately runs into challenges he never anticipated. How finely should he chop the onions? The recipe just says chop. He accidentally burns the garlic, filling his kitchen with a bitter smell. He adds too much salt and has to figure out how to fix it. After 2 hours of stressful work, His homemade sauce tastes just okay. It's not as good as the sauce from the jar. His confidence begins to waver. He thinks, wow, maybe this is harder than I thought. This is the moment he starts his descent from the peak of Mount Stupid. He is gaining real knowledge, and as a result, his illusion of expertise is starting to crumble. This pattern repeats itself in all areas of life, not just in the kitchen. Consider the experience of learning a new language like English. After just a few weeks of using a language app, a learner might be able to introduce themselves and ask simple questions like, "My name is Maya," or "Where is the library?" They feel a wonderful sense of progress, and that feeling is valid and important for motivation. But if that initial success leads them to believe, "English is easy, I'll be fluent in 6 months," it's likely because they have only seen the very tip of the iceberg. They haven't yet encountered the confusing labyrinth of phrasal verbs, the subtle art of using articles like a and the correctly, the countless exceptions to grammar rules, or the vast differences between regional accents. But as Maya continues her studies, as she tries to watch a movie without subtitles or listen to a podcast with native speakers talking at natural speed, she suddenly notices all the things she didn't see before. She hears idioms that don't make any literal sense, like "bite the bullet" or "let the cat out of the bag." She feels a pang of frustration. Her confidence drops. She might think, "I've been studying for months. Why do I still feel so lost?" This is the Dunning-Kruger effect in full swing. At the beginning, when your knowledge is just a small island, everything seems simple and contained. But as that island of knowledge grows, its shoreline, the border between what you know and what you don't know, also grows, revealing the vast, deep ocean of what is yet to be discovered. Here's the most important part of this journey. Eventually, the confidence comes back. As you persist through that valley of despair, as you keep learning, practicing, and gaining genuine experience, your confidence slowly begins to climb again. But this time, it's a different kind of confidence. It's not the brittle, inflated confidence of the beginner. It is a quiet, humble, and resilient confidence. It is a confidence that is built on a solid foundation of real knowledge and a deep awareness of the subject's complexity. It is the confidence of an expert who knows so much that they are also acutely aware of how much more there is to learn. So, why do we so often fall into this illusion of certainty in the first place? Part of it is just human nature. Our brains are wired to seek patterns and create a sense of order. Feeling sure of ourselves gives us a comforting sense of control in a chaotic world. And in some cases, that initial burst of confidence is genuinely helpful. It provides the activation energy, the courage to start something new and push through the initial difficulties. But if we remain stuck in that place for too long, if we cling to the belief that we already know everything we need to know, we completely shut down the possibility of growth. That is why developing self-awareness is so incredibly important. When you start to feel your confidence dip, when you start to notice just how much you don't know, it is not a signal to give up. It is a powerful sign that you are moving in the right direction. You are stepping out of the comfortable illusion of certainty and into a more honest, more challenging, and ultimately more rewarding relationship with the process of learning. It can feel deeply uncomfortable. Yes, but it is also the true beginning of profound and lasting understanding. So, here is a question for you to reflect on. Can you remember a time in your own life when you felt very certain about something, but later realized you didn't know as much as you thought? What did that moment of realization feel like for you? And how did that experience change your perspective on learning? The truth is, none of us knows everything, and that's more than okay. What matters most is not pretending to have all the answers, but rather staying open, staying curious, and remaining willing to keep learning, especially when the journey feels slow or uncertain. Because sometimes, realizing what you don't know is the most powerful and necessary step toward gaining true knowledge. Let's be truly honest with ourselves. Most of us embark on a new learning journey with a wonderful mixture of excitement and hopeful anticipation. There is a special kind of energy that exists only at the beginning. You feel motivated and deeply curious. You might even feel a little proud of yourself for finally taking the leap to start something new. And for a little while, things tend to go quite well. You make visible progress, you grasp the fundamental concepts, and you feel a real sense of moving forward. But then, almost inevitably, something shifts. You begin to venture deeper into the subject, below the easy surface. And suddenly, you don't feel quite so confident anymore. The initial excitement might still be there. Yes. But now it's mingling with other, more complicated emotions. Confusion, frustration, and that nagging voice of self-doubt. You start to have the thought, wow, this is so much bigger and more complex than I ever imagined. And that very moment, that specific feeling of being simultaneously enlightened and overwhelmed, is what this part of our conversation is all about. I still remember this happening to me with crystal clarity the first time I decided to learn about the history of my own city. I thought it would be a straightforward and enjoyable project. I would learn about the city's founding, memorize the dates of a few key events, and learn the stories behind some of the famous landmarks. Simple enough, right? But the more I started to read, the more I realized that history isn't just a simple timeline of events. Every story I uncovered opened up 10 more questions. I learned about the complex economic forces that shaped the city's growth, the social conflicts between different communities, the political decisions made behind closed doors that had consequences for generations. I started to see the hidden layers beneath the streets I walked every day. At one point, after spending a whole weekend in the library archives, I felt completely lost in a sea of information. I felt so small. It was a profoundly humbling experience. And that word, humbling, is incredibly important here. When an experience is humbling, it makes you realize that you are not as skilled, as knowledgeable, or as important as you might have previously thought. It gently, or sometimes not so gently, brings you back down to earth. A humbling experience doesn't mean you are a failure or that you're unintelligent. Not at all. It simply means you are finally seeing the reality of the situation more clearly. And seeing that truth, recognizing that you still have a very long and winding road ahead of you, can honestly make you feel small. Almost like you've been reset back to being a complete beginner again. This phenomenon occurs constantly in the journey of language learning. For instance, Maybe you have been diligently studying English for a year or two. You know hundreds of grammar rules by heart. You have flashcards with thousands of vocabulary words. You can read articles and even pass standardized tests with good scores. You feel confident in your abilities within the structured environment of a classroom. But then, you take a trip to an English-speaking country, or you join an online conversation with a group of native speakers. And suddenly, you feel completely lost. You can only catch maybe 60% of what is being said, or even less. The conversation moves at a blistering pace. You hear slang and cultural references that you don't recognize. You notice that the words are not pronounced cleanly and separately the way they are in your audio lessons. Instead, they blend together in a continuous, flowing stream of sound. And just like that, your carefully constructed confidence shatters. You might find yourself thinking, have I really learned anything at all? All those hours of study feel worthless right now. But of course, you have learned something. In fact, you have learned enough to finally recognize how much more there is to learn. And that is the crucial difference. That moment of dizzying realization is not a failure. It is a critical turning point in your journey. The unspoken truth is that real, deep learning doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it feels deeply uncomfortable, even heavy. It's like opening a door that you thought led to a small closet, only to find that it opens into an entire, unexplored universe. And at first, your brain instinctively recoils and says, "Wait a minute. I did not sign up for this." You feel overwhelmed, disoriented, and completely unsure of where you should even begin to take your next step. This feeling is completely normal. And in fact, it is something that almost every dedicated, serious learner experiences, regardless of their field. Think about a person learning to play a musical instrument, like the piano. In the beginning, they might learn how to play a simple melody with one hand. It feels amazing. They feel like a musician. But later, they discover the complexities of playing with both hands simultaneously, reading sheet music with its intricate symbols, understanding music theory, learning about harmony, rhythm, and improvisation. The more they learn, the more they see just how deep and vast the world of music truly is. Suddenly, that first simple melody feels like a single drop of water in an endless ocean. That realization can be discouraging, but it can also be incredibly inspiring if you choose to see it that way. And that is the very heart of this message. Feeling smaller does not mean you are shrinking. It means your perspective is expanding. You are seeing more of the whole picture. You are understanding the world in a more nuanced and complex way. And with that new, expanded understanding comes a new sense of responsibility and a new kind of strength. So, if you have ever had a moment where you felt completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of what you didn't know, I want you to hold on to this thought. That feeling does not mean you are doing something wrong. On the contrary, it means you are doing something profoundly right. You are moving past the shallow surface of the topic. You are engaging with real complexity, and you are beginning to build the foundations of genuine, lasting knowledge. Let me ask you to reflect for a moment. Can you remember a time when learning something new made you feel lost or uncertain, like you had taken what you thought was a giant leap forward, but then suddenly felt as if you were 10 steps behind where you started? How did you respond in that moment of discomfort? Did you retreat and stop? Or did you find a way to push through and keep going? Most people don't talk about this part of the learning process. On social media and in success stories, they only show the polished results, the effortless progress, the final victory. But real learners, the people who truly stick with something for the long haul, know that behind every impressive skill is a long, often messy and frustrating journey. Feeling small isn't a reason to quit. It's actually a clear sign that you have stepped into something much bigger than yourself. And if that is where you find yourself right now, feeling a bit lost, a bit overwhelmed, maybe even a little humbled, let me say this to you as clearly as I can. Keep going. You are exactly where you need to be. When you decide to learn something new, especially something as complex and challenging as a new language or a professional skill, it is completely and totally normal to feel uncomfortable at times. You might feel confused by a new concept, frustrated by your slow progress, or even a little bit lost and unsure of what to do next. In those moments, it's very easy to start questioning yourself. You might wonder if you're failing, or if you're simply not smart enough or talented enough to succeed. But here is a very important, very powerful idea that I want you to hold on to tightly. That discomfort you feel, that friction, is actually a very, very good sign. It means that you are growing. Let me explain this with a metaphor. Think about what happens when you go to the gym to build muscle. When you lift weights that are heavier than what you're used to, your muscles feel strained. They might even feel a little bit sore the next day. That soreness and discomfort isn't a sign that you've injured yourself. It's a sign that you've challenged your muscles enough to stimulate growth. You've created tiny micro-tears in the muscle fibers, and, as your body repairs them, the muscles grow back stronger than before. If you only ever lifted weights that felt easy and comfortable, you would never get any stronger. The same exact principle applies to our brains when we learn. When we feel stuck or mentally uncomfortable, it's like our brain is lifting a heavy weight. It's not a sign of failure. It is a sign that something incredibly important is happening under the surface. You are growing. Your brain is actively stretching to accommodate new ideas. And your entire mindset is expanding. There is a very famous and profound quote from the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates that helps us see this idea with perfect clarity. Socrates, who was considered one of the wisest men of his time, famously said, "I know that I know nothing." At first glance, this statement might sound negative or even strange. Why would a wise person claim to know nothing? But, in reality, this is one of the most insightful things anyone has ever said about the nature of knowledge. What Socrates truly meant is this: true wisdom does not begin with having all the answers. It begins the moment you realize how much you don't know. Admitting that you don't have all the answers is what opens the door to genuine learning. It takes a great deal of courage and humility to say the words, "I don't know." But when you do, you give yourself the powerful permission to explore, to ask questions, and to grow without the heavy burden of pretending. So, if you ever find yourself feeling like you're failing because you don't understand a new grammar concept immediately, or because you keep making the same mistake when you speak, I want you to pause for a moment and consciously reframe that thought. Remind yourself, you are not failing. You are leveling up. This expression, leveling up, comes directly from the world of video games. In a game, when a player faces a particularly tough challenge or a powerful boss, it doesn't mean the game is broken or that the player is bad at it. It means they are on the verge of reaching a new level. Successfully overcoming that challenge unlocks new skills, new abilities, and new areas of the game to explore. Learning is exactly like that. Every difficulty, every mistake, every moment of confusion is a step toward your next level of competence. Some people hold the mistaken belief that learning should always feel easy and effortless. They think that if they are truly smart, they should be able to understand everything right away. But that's not how real, deep learning ever works. It is perfectly normal to hit bumps in the road. You will feel frustrated. You will feel tired. But these are the moments that matter the most. These are the moments that build your mental strength, your resilience, and your depth of understanding. In fact, if you never feel challenged, it might be a sign that you are not pushing yourself far enough. Real growth only happens when you step just outside of your comfort zone. When you try things that seem a little bit difficult or new. That is the fertile ground where real progress takes root and blossoms. Think about how a baby learns to walk. At first, they stumble and fall countless times. They might get frustrated, cry, or feel scared, but each and every fall teaches them something invaluable about balance, coordination, and persistence. They get a little bit stronger. Their sense of balance improves, and they become more confident with each attempt. Eventually, they are not just walking, but running, jumping, and even dancing. Without all of those initial falls, walking would never happen. So, feeling small or unsure is an essential and unavoidable part of the process. It means you are learning something meaningful. It means your brain is working hard to forge new neural connections, and it means you are on your way to becoming more skilled, more knowledgeable, and more confident. Here is a question for you to consider. The next time you feel stuck, confused, or frustrated in your learning, can you try to consciously see it as a sign that you are leveling up? What would change in your emotional experience if you thought of these difficulties not as problems, but as opportunities? Remember, no one becomes an expert overnight. Every expert you admire, every teacher who inspires you, every successful person you look up to has been through countless moments of doubt and challenge. The only difference is that they chose to keep going, especially when it was hard. So as you continue your incredible journey with the English language, or with anything else you choose to learn, hold on to this powerful idea. Discomfort is a sign of growth. You are not failing. You are leveling up. And when you truly internalize that mindset, you will find it so much easier to keep moving forward, even when the path ahead seems foggy and unclear. You will become more patient with yourself, more compassionate during setbacks, and more open to the new possibilities that are waiting just on the other side of the struggle. As we continue our exploration into this idea that learning more can sometimes make us feel like we know less, there is another very important and very common challenge that I want to talk about with you today, and that challenge is perfectionism. Perfectionism is that persistent, nagging voice inside your head that whispers or sometimes shouts that everything you do has to be absolutely perfect before you can even start, or before you can feel any sense of pride in what you have accomplished. It is the deep-seated fear of not knowing everything, or of making even the smallest mistake. And this fear can become so powerful that it completely paralyzes you, holding you back from ever moving forward. Have you ever found yourself getting stuck inside your own head, thinking and overthinking, analyzing every possible outcome, worrying constantly about whether you are truly ready or good enough to take the next step? Perhaps you have desperately wanted to start speaking English more often and more confidently, but you held back because you were worried about making a grammar mistake or using the wrong word and sounding silly. Or maybe you've wanted to try a new hobby, learn a new skill like coding or graphic design, or even apply for a new job. But you hesitated and procrastinated because you felt like you didn't know enough yet. This is an incredibly common experience, and it has a name: analysis paralysis. It is the state of being where you spend so much time thinking, planning, researching, and worrying that you never actually get around to taking any action. You become trapped in an endless loop of trying to create the perfect plan, or waiting for the perfect moment before you even begin. I want you to pause for a moment and ask yourself this question with genuine curiosity. What is it that truly stops you from starting? Is it the fear of making mistakes in front of others? Is it the fear of looking foolish or incompetent? Or perhaps, is it the deep-seated belief that you need to know absolutely everything about a subject before you are qualified to take the very first step? Here is the truly tricky part about perfectionism. On the surface, it feels like it's trying to protect you. That inner voice is trying to shield you from the potential pain of failure or embarrassment. But in reality, it can become your single greatest obstacle to growth. When you wait for everything to be perfect, you are actually preventing yourself from engaging in the very process of learning and growing. Let's bring this back to learning English. If you make a rule for yourself that you will only speak when you are 100% certain that your grammar will be flawless, you might never get the chance to practice in a real, spontaneous conversation with another human being. But the simple, unavoidable truth is that making mistakes is one of the most effective and efficient ways to improve. Every single mistake you make is a learning opportunity in disguise. It shines a light on something you don't yet fully understand. Every awkward conversation you push through helps you build fluency, confidence, and the mental agility to think on your feet. I remember a time when I was learning how to play the guitar. I was absolutely terrified of making mistakes, especially of hitting a wrong note and creating an unpleasant sound. I would practice a new song alone in my room for hours, trying to play it perfectly from beginning to end. But the moment I tried to play it in front of someone else, my hands would start to shake, and I would get stuck in my head, overthinking every single finger placement. Eventually, I realized that this obsession with perfection was just a way to avoid the risk of being vulnerable. So, I made a conscious decision. I forced myself to join a small, informal music group with some friends. I knew my playing wouldn't be perfect. And it wasn't. I made plenty of mistakes. But guess what? Nobody laughed. They were supportive. and the more I played with them, the more relaxed and confident I became. This is why it is so vitally important to actively challenge the voice of perfectionism. It is okay to be imperfect. It is okay to be a beginner. No one, absolutely no one, starts out as an expert. The real key to progress is to keep taking action, to keep moving forward, even when you don't have all the answers, and even when things don't go exactly as you planned. Let me ask you that question again. What is it that stops you from starting something new? And if your honest answer is perfectionism or the fear of failure, how can you begin to gently remind yourself that taking imperfect action is always, always better than waiting for perfect conditions that may never arrive? Here is a helpful and powerful way to reframe your thinking. Every expert was once a beginner. Nobody was born knowing everything, and every single successful person you can think of has made countless mistakes, faced demoralizing setbacks, and felt deeply unsure of themselves along the way. The thing that made the difference, the thing that separated them from those who gave up, was that they didn't allow themselves to get stuck in their own heads. They chose to try, to learn from their mistakes, and to keep going no matter what. So if you are feeling stuck today, if that voice of perfectionism is whispering doubts in your ear, please remember this. You do not have to be perfect to start. You just have to be brave enough to take that first, messy, imperfect step. Because that is where the real magic of growth always begins. One of the most interesting and perhaps liberating truths about learning is that it never truly ends. No matter how much knowledge or experience a person accumulates, there will always be moments, and often many of them, when they feel like a complete beginner all over again. Even the most seasoned experts, the most respected teachers, the most brilliant doctors, and the most creative artists continually face this cyclical experience throughout their lives and careers. Let me paint a clearer picture with an example. Imagine a dedicated high school history teacher named Mrs. Davis. She has been teaching for over 20 years. You might assume that after so much time in the classroom, she knows everything there is to know about her subject. But the reality is far more dynamic. Every new generation of students brings with them a different perspective, a new way of seeing the world shaped by current events and technology. Sometimes, Mrs. Davis has to learn entirely new teaching methods, like how to use interactive software or integrate online resources into her lessons to keep her students engaged. Perhaps new historical research is published that challenges long-held beliefs about a certain event, forcing her to update her curriculum. In these moments, even with all her experience, she has to adopt the mindset of a learner, and in some ways, she feels like a beginner all over again. The same exact process happens in the field of medicine. Medicine is a discipline that is in a constant state of rapid evolution. Every single year, new scientific research is published, new life-saving treatments are developed, and new medications become available. A doctor who is committed to providing the best possible care for their patients cannot simply rely on what they learned in medical school 20 years ago. They need to be lifelong learners. When a new surgical technique is introduced, or a new type of disease emerges, even the most experienced surgeons and physicians have to go back to studying. They have to read research papers, attend workshops, and practice new skills. This means they must be comfortable with the humility of not knowing, and be willing to start fresh with new knowledge. Artists also live this experience constantly. Think about a talented painter or a skilled musician. Even if they have been creating incredible art for decades, they might feel a creative urge to try a new style, a different medium, or an unfamiliar technique. A classical pianist might decide to take lessons to learn how to play jazz. A painter who has always worked with oil paints might experiment with watercolors or digital art. Trying something new always means embracing the vulnerability of being a beginner again. It is a necessary process to fuel their growth and keep their creativity vibrant and alive. This recurring experience of transitioning from a state of expertise back to a state of being a beginner is not a sign of failure or regression. It is, in fact, a normal and profoundly important part of a meaningful learning journey. It teaches us that knowledge is not a static, fixed object that we can acquire and possess forever. It is a flowing, dynamic river. And sometimes, you need to take a step back, or even change your course, in order to keep moving forward. In this ongoing process, a few key ideas become incredibly important. The first is mindset. Cultivating a growth mindset. The belief that your abilities and intelligence can be developed through dedication and hard work is essential. People with this mindset do not view setbacks or moments of feeling like a beginner as reasons to quit. Instead, they see them as valuable opportunities to learn, to adapt, and to improve. Another crucial factor is consistency. Deep learning isn't the result of one single, heroic effort. It is the cumulative effect of small, regular, and often unglamorous steps taken over a long period of time. Practicing a little every day, being patient with yourself during the slow phases, and maintaining your curiosity are the habits that build mastery over time. And finally, this all ties into the beautiful concept of lifelong learning. The process of learning does not end when you graduate from school or achieve a certain level of proficiency in a skill. It is something you do for your entire life. Every single day offers a new chance to discover something you didn't know, to understand something on a deeper level, or to try a new skill just for the joy of it. So, if you ever find yourself feeling like you're starting from zero, or like you don't know nearly enough, please remember that even the experts go through this. Feeling like a beginner again is a natural, healthy part of growth. It means you are courageous enough to be open to learning and improving. Think about your own learning journey for a moment. Have you ever experienced a time when you thought you had finally mastered something, only to discover a whole new layer of complexity you hadn't seen before? Maybe it happened when you moved to a new country and had to learn new cultural norms. Maybe it was when you started a new job and had to master unfamiliar software. These moments can certainly feel challenging, but they are also incredibly exciting. They remind us that the journey of learning is alive. It is not a finish line to be crossed. It is a winding path, full of surprises, challenges, and wonderful new opportunities for growth. So, I encourage you to keep a growth mindset. Be consistent, even when your progress feels painfully slow. And always remember that every expert was once a beginner, and sometimes they have the courage to become a beginner all over again. That is the true beauty of a life dedicated to learning. Have you ever stopped to notice that how people react to the simple act of not knowing something can be very different depending on the culture they grew up in? In some places, not knowing the answer to a question or making a mistake in public can feel like a significant problem, something to be hidden or feel ashamed of. But in other cultures, not knowing is viewed as a completely natural part of the learning process, and is even seen as an exciting opportunity to become curious and discover something new. Let's start by thinking more deeply about that first idea, the culture of shame. In many societies, and perhaps in many school systems or families, there is a strong, often unspoken, message that you should already know certain things. If you don't, you might feel a wave of embarrassment or even become afraid to admit your lack of knowledge. This can cause people to become very quiet in meetings or classrooms, avoiding asking questions at all costs. They might nod and pretend to understand a complex explanation, even when they are completely lost, just to avoid the perceived shame of revealing their confusion. Have you ever felt that way? Like you couldn't possibly ask for help or clarification because you didn't want others to think less of you, to think you were stupid or slow. This feeling, this fear of judgment, can be one of the biggest barriers to learning. When we are afraid to admit we don't know something, we rob ourselves of the chance to grow. It creates an immense pressure to be perfect, and this pressure can easily lead to anxiety, stress, and a crippling sense of self-doubt. On the other hand, some cultures actively encourage curiosity. They foster the idea that it is not only okay, but actually a good thing to ask questions, to explore new ideas, and to accept that not knowing is a fundamental part of being human. In these environments, a teacher might frequently say things like, "That's an excellent question," or "It's okay to make mistakes. That's how we learn best." In these cultures, people tend to feel more comfortable saying, "I'm not sure I understand. Can you explain that in a different way?" Or, "I don't know the answer, but I'm excited to find out." This attitude helps people stay open-minded, resilient, and willing to try new things without the fear of failure hanging over their heads. So, which of these cultural messages do you hear more often in your daily life? In your workplace? Your school? Or even your family? Is there more emphasis on shame around mistakes and not knowing? Or is there more space for curiosity and acceptance? Becoming aware of these cultural messages is a powerful step. It can help you understand how your own background has shaped your attitude toward learning. It can also empower you to consciously develop new habits and new ways of thinking that better support your personal growth. Now, let's talk about some incredibly useful language that can help us navigate conversations when we are not 100% sure about something. This is especially helpful when speaking English, because using these phrases shows humility and respect for other opinions, and it effectively softens the directness of any uncertainty. For example, instead of stating an opinion as a hard fact, you might say, "I might be wrong, but," or "I'm not completely sure, but I think." These simple opening phrases completely change the tone of your statement. They allow you to share your ideas while clearly signaling that you are open to being corrected or to hearing a different perspective. They make conversations feel safer, more collaborative, and much more friendly. Another wonderful phrase is, "as far as I know." This expression means that you believe something to be true based on your current knowledge, but you acknowledge that your knowledge might be incomplete. Using these kinds of softeners is a fantastic way to practice your conversational English, especially when you are still building your confidence. You could try to consciously incorporate these expressions into your speaking or writing, particularly in situations where you might feel nervous about being incorrect. They help you express your thoughts clearly while keeping the lines of communication open and relaxed. Let me ask you to reflect for a moment. When was the last time you openly admitted that you didn't know something? How did that moment feel? Were you comfortable asking for help? Or did you feel a sense of hesitation? Please remember, everyone, even the most articulate native speakers and the most decorated experts in any field, does not know everything. Admitting uncertainty is a sign of intellectual honesty and intelligence, never a weakness. So, if you grew up in a culture that places a high value on certainty and perfection, it might take some conscious practice to feel truly okay with the state of not knowing. But that is perfectly normal. The process of shifting from a feeling of shame to a feeling of curiosity about what you don't know can be one of the most powerful and liberating steps in your entire learning journey. It opens the door to new ideas, new experiences, and entirely new ways of thinking. And that spirit of curiosity, combined with a deep sense of kindness toward yourself, will undoubtedly help you become a more confident, more resilient, and ultimately more successful learner. One of the most powerful and transformative things you can do on your learning journey is to consciously shift your mindset. What do I mean by that exactly? Well, many of us begin a new challenge with the underlying belief that we need to have all the answers right away. We feel a pressure to understand everything perfectly before we allow ourselves to move forward. But this way of thinking, this demand for immediate certainty, can be incredibly limiting. Imagine for a moment if you truly believed that you had to know everything about a subject before you could even try it. You would probably feel completely stuck, right? You might feel overwhelmed by the sheer amount of information you'd need to master first, or even terrified of making a mistake. And that is precisely the mental trap that holds so many people back from achieving their goals. So, shifting your mindset means making a deliberate move away from needing all the answers, and toward being completely okay with staying open and curious. It means truly accepting that learning is a process. It is sometimes slow. It is often confusing, but it is always valuable. Let's talk about two phrases that are really helpful guides in making this shift. The first one is progress over perfection. This simple but profound idea means that it is far more important to make small, consistent improvements than it is to be flawless. You do not need to get everything right all the time. What truly matters is that you keep moving forward, even if it's just one tiny step each day. Maybe today your progress is speaking just a few sentences in English with a colleague. Maybe it's reading a single short article, or listening to a podcast like this one. Every single small step is progress, and progress, sustained over time, is what leads to mastery. The second powerful phrase is growth mindset. This concept was popularized by the psychologist Dr. Carol Dweck, and it refers to the belief that your fundamental abilities, like your English skills or your intelligence, can grow and develop through effort, good strategies, and practice. People with a growth mindset do not view mistakes as devastating failures. Instead, they see them as essential opportunities to learn and improve. They understand that skills and intelligence are not fixed traits that you are born with. They are dynamic qualities that can be cultivated and strengthened over time. Adopting a growth mindset helps you become more resilient. Resilience is the crucial ability to keep going even when things are difficult. When you face setbacks, perhaps you can't seem to understand a complex grammar rule, or you feel a wave of anxiety during a conversation. Resilience is what helps you bounce back and try again, instead of giving up entirely. Along with resilience, it is incredibly important to cultivate emotional flexibility. This means being able to notice and manage your feelings in a healthy and constructive way. The process of learning can sometimes make you feel frustrated, tired, or deeply discouraged. Emotional flexibility allows you to acknowledge these feelings without letting them take control of your actions. You can accept that it's perfectly okay to feel this way, and then gently guide yourself back to the path of trying again. A wonderful way to practice emotional flexibility is to pay attention to your inner voice, your self-talk. Instead of saying something harsh like, "I'm terrible at this," you can try saying something kinder and more accurate, like, "This part is challenging for me, but I am working on it, and I'm learning." When you consciously change your inner dialogue like this, you create a much more supportive and nurturing environment for learning and growth. Let me ask you to think about this. What would happen if you focused more on progress over perfection in your English learning this week? How would it feel to give yourself permission to make mistakes as a natural part of your journey? Could you start to consciously notice and celebrate your small improvements, instead of waiting until you feel perfect? Please remember, shifting your mindset does not happen overnight. It takes time, awareness, and consistent practice. But each and every time you choose to embrace curiosity instead of fear, or to keep going instead of giving up, you are building stronger mental habits and a healthier, more sustainable attitude toward learning. This mindset shift also has a wonderful side effect. It opens you up to experiencing more joy in the process of learning. When you are not constantly stressed about being perfect, you can actually enjoy the journey, the discoveries, the challenges, and the wonderful surprises along the way. So, as you continue on your path, I invite you to try to keep these two powerful phrases in your mind: progress over perfection and growth mindset. Use them as a mantra, as a gentle reminder that learning is about moving forward step by step, with unwavering patience and kindness toward yourself. And if you ever feel stuck or discouraged, take a slow, deep breath and ask yourself this simple question: what can I learn from this moment? That single question has the power to turn any challenge into an opportunity. You are growing. You are learning. And that is what truly matters. As we come to the end of today's episode, let's take a moment to look back on some of the important ideas we've talked about. First, we explored how sometimes the more we learn, the more we realize there is so much we don't know. This can feel confusing or even overwhelming, but it's actually a sign of growth and curiosity. Remember the famous quote from Socrates, "I know that I know nothing." That idea shows us that true wisdom comes from being open to new knowledge, not from pretending we have all the answers. We also talked about the challenges of perfectionism, how waiting to be perfect before starting something new can keep us stuck. Instead, it's better to focus on progress, to take small steps, and to accept mistakes as part of the journey. This leads us to the idea of shifting our mindset, choosing a growth mindset, and valuing progress over perfection. When we do this, we become more resilient, able to keep going even when things get hard. We looked at how different cultures view knowledge and mistakes in different ways. Some see not knowing as shameful, while others encourage curiosity and learning from mistakes. Understanding this can help us become more patient and kind with ourselves and others, and we learned that even experts feel like beginners sometimes. Learning is a lifelong process full of setbacks and new beginnings. The key is consistency and keeping a mindset open to growth. So now I want to invite you to think deeply for a moment. What's something you've avoided because you didn't feel ready? Maybe it's speaking English with new people, trying a new skill, or even sharing your ideas with others. What stopped you from taking that step? Was it fear of making mistakes? Fear of not knowing enough? Whatever your answer is, remember this. Feeling not ready is normal, and it's okay. The important thing is to be kind to yourself and to find the courage to try anyway, because every step you take, no matter how small, brings you closer to where you want to be. Learning isn't about being perfect or knowing everything. It's about being curious, open, and brave enough to explore the unknown. It's about embracing uncertainty and trusting yourself to grow. As you continue your learning journey, I hope you carry these ideas with you. Practice self-compassion, celebrate your progress, and remember that every expert was once a beginner, and sometimes they become beginners again. And that's a beautiful part of the adventure. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of English in Fluency. I'm really glad you joined me today. If you enjoyed this conversation, I hope you'll come back for future episodes where we will explore more interesting topics to help you improve your English and grow as a learner. Until then, take care of yourself, keep being curious, and keep moving forward on your English journey step by step. I'll see you next time.